Today we're covering Season 1, Episode 3, Fixer. This is the episode in which we go and find a local fixer, talk about that later, who has a couple of things going on. There's a local thug, there's a local leg breaker. They're both dead, the end. That's cool. These are not my notes. These are my notes. So, what weirded me out at the beginning of the episode is they do this previously on Justified thing. And I'm like, hold up. Why are you doing that here? And then as they were going through it, I was like, oh, I get it. Yeah, no, that tracks completely. Here's the thing. I actually have talked about this before, but something that has been requested of me many times is to not assume everyone who's heard me talk about to not assume everyone's seen every body of work I've ever covered, right? Because, and I know this is going to shock you, considering I've been doing this for 11 years now, but it's a lot. I'm probably the only person who remembers most of the stuff I've covered at this point. So, forgive me for the repetition for those of you who've watched my Babylon 5 stuff. This is one of those paradoxes of creating long-form entertainment. One of the things that used to bug the crap out of me back in Babylon 5 is they do these flashbacks to remind you of stuff. And I hate that. I hate that. It feels like the episode's talking down to me. It feels like the episode's treating me like I'm a moron. It's like, hey, here's something significant. And I can't even do it because I'm being blocked by this sub, but as soon as this thing goes away, I'm going to show you, hey, here it is. Look, here's the significant thing. And rather than relying on the viewer to pick up on things, rather than relying on the intelligence and the capacity and the analysis and even just the enjoyment of the viewer to be like, oh, that connects to that thing, it shows you it outright, and that drives me bonkers. But this is the reason I call this a paradox is because you have to understand the perspectives here. So usually when I'm sitting down watching through a show, I'm getting interrupted by a sub from Mr. Red, which I'm going to completely ignore for the moment. And instead, I'm going to talk about how the fact that I'm usually watching them consecutively. Now, obviously, that's not always true, but the point is that's usually how that tends to go, right? So when you're sitting down watching something, episode to episode or week to week, you tend to be capable of retaining stuff a little bit easier, right? So when you, what's the term for that? There's a term. Binge. When you binge, it's different than when it was originally coming out. A lot of long-form fiction is, I know this is going to sound strange, designed to be long-form. It's designed to be something that happens over a lengthy period of time. And so, by the way, what do you think of the new webcam setup? Completely new setup. I did it when I was doing the direction videos for the Dabbler rewrite. Make sure you go do get your auditions in if you haven't already. We are currently open for auditions in the Dabbler rewrite. We have been since yesterday. So when you're binging, it's different because you're more likely to remember something that you saw yesterday or a couple hours ago than something that you saw 3 months ago. And that's why I call it the paradox, because there's actually another layer here too. Now, this is not bragging, but I have a really good memory. So when I used to sit down with my mom, and I'd sit down and we'd be like, all right, let's watch Star Trek. Let's go through this. And we'd watch it every week. I would remember stuff from a year or two ago, right? Because that's just me. But how many other people are going to remember a plot point that showed up 2 years ago? Now, obviously, there are people. There are people who are going to catch stuff like that. But you got to understand, when you're looking at the group of all people who are watching your show, and you're considering how many people are going to catch what and where, that number has shrunk substantially if you're going to try and do something like that. Again, I brought this up substantially and significantly during Babylon 5. Because, how many of you even caught the fact that Bruce Maddox is actually referenced in Season 4 of TNG? It's one line. Now, I'm not talking about, more recent. I'm talking about when the show was coming out. So literally 2 years gap between that. So, anyways, hopefully Imperial Star Destroyer can join me at some point. No idea what's going on with that. But you get my point, right? That's why I call this a paradox, because there's no good answer here. There's no way to really satisfy all requirements, because there's going to be people who don't really pay attention that much, or don't care that much, or don't have that kind of a memory, or aren't binging, or whatever. There's too many circumstances where too many people are not going to catch that sort of things. So what you do is you shove it right into the audience's face so that they know it's significant. Now, I get why they do that. I get the idea, the purpose, and the concept. And I do understand the idea of trying to lower the barrier to entry to pick up on the long-form stuff. But I'm just mentioning it because here in this episode, we have a previously on. And again, when I was first watching it, I was baffled. Like, why is there a previous? This is not string continuity, which we talked about last time. This is, however, background arcs. There are 2 background arcs that move forward in this episode. The biggest one, of course, being the movement between Raylan and Ava. But that's why they do it, is to remind you of that stuff. Now, having said all of that, I do think that this isn't a binary situation. We do have a bit of a gradient in between the 2-year thing I just mentioned. That also applies in Babylon 5, by the way. Or something that happened 2 episodes ago. So what I'm trying to say is, in this exact case, I am going to ding this episode for it. Because, come on. Even under the worst case scenario, this is something that happened 2 weeks ago. Ironically, that's also true for me, because I am not binging this. I am watching this week to week. So I saw this stuff 2 weeks ago. Anyways, just wanted to talk about that because, well, I get the paradox of it and I get the desire to do it, blah, blah, blah. And as we talked about during the Bab 5 thing, there's no perfect way to do this kind of stuff. This is a bit much. Anyways, so this then leads us to the first of the 2 background arcs that I was just referencing, his dad. Now, this is really brief, but there is a good scene and they allow some good, I call it chewing. It's a terrible analogy, but that is what I call it. It's when a scene is given time to just sit there for a moment and chew on something for a bit, right? To let it process. It could have been just, hey, your dad's been arrested. Okay, cool, move on. But instead they sit there for several minutes as they kind of talk back and forth. We get a little bit of the dynamic between Mullen, I think his name is, the chief, and Raylan. And, you know, we got a little bit of a thing. There's this wonderful bit where Raylan asks, did he kill anybody? And Mullen's reaction is something along the lines of this. Like, what? And we're not sure if he's actually meaning that sincerely, or maybe he really was the kind of person who would murder people. And there's just a lot of wonderful stuff. I don't actually have much to say about it. I just like the fact that they really do sit and process this for a minute. And we do move that particular background thread forward. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to when we finally meet Raylan's dad, but I'm guaranteed we're going to happen at some point because they keep moving that plot forwards. So then they dive right into it and they go and meet Pittner. I have such a hard time pronouncing that word. You notice some of the actors pronounce it differently throughout the course of the work. Some just drop the T entirely and just say Pittner. Oh, God, I'm screwing up. Pittner. There we go. And some try to emphasize the T a bit too much. Pittner. And then there's kind of an in-between. Everybody says it a little bit differently. It's actually funny to me. It makes sense, though. To that type, I don't want to go into the etymology of it, but that's not etymology. What's that called? Letter sounds? There's actually a term for that. I can't think of it. I studied it when I was designing Imperial. When you have a nah, so your mouth closes to do one letter, T, and then the other one open to do the other thing, N. Those two, there's like a natural break between those as you're saying it. Pittner. You notice how I just actually have a pause there. Because in natural English, that's how that should be said. Pittner. I don't know what Pittner actually is. I imagine it's not an innately English word, which would explain why it sounds so unusual when spoken in English tongue. But I'm going to stop talking about words and move on to the actual episode. So Pittner there, he's like, hey, what up? Eigenberg does a really good job with the role, by the way. A nice little Brooklyn thing. He's like, hey, try this drink. It's like drinking Brooklyn. In a good way. I love that little clarification. In a good way, because my first visceral reaction was, it's like drinking Brooklyn. Was just, why would you want to do that? first name basis with the staff, knows what he's doing, yada, yada, yada. This is the series continuing. It's tend to divide its criminals into categories, which is good. I actually like that. I know there's the old saying that archetypes are bad, and that saying is stupid and dumb, because archetypes are tools, as all other things are. So in this case, what we've got is the tool of categorizing. Hittner is someone who is a crook. We could tell he's part of the criminal underworld. He is, in fact, a fixer. More on that in a minute. It's the second time I mentioned that. And he's... he's not a thug. He's not violent. He's got a bit of irreverence. That would make sense, Crimson King. There you go. See? I knew it. I didn't know the specifics. All I can do is analyze. I don't have information. I have analysis. That's how it usually goes. He's some people would call someone like him a white-collar criminal, someone who isn't willing to get their hands dirty. But actually, believe it or not, the white-collar criminal is another trope, and much, much worse than what he is. No, this is someone who's kind of just one step, just one step into the criminal underworld. He's a little skeezy, but calling him a full-tilt criminal is almost going too far. And that's the interesting part. And that's true. I said all of this right at the very beginning. I've got my notes on it right here. And having watched the whole episode now, I stand by that. He's not really a criminal. Certainly not like Travis or Curtis. Yeah, exactly. He's some IS Destroyer says, he's like a middle manager. He's the middleman. He's a fixer, which I suppose is as good a time as any to go ahead and mention what a fixer is. Now, I'm going to pause here because I've gotten quite a few subs, because of course I have. So first of all, thank you, Magister. I do want to thank you very much. I'll put that down for Wowcata later. Thank you, Mr. Red. I'll put that towards Suikoden Tactics. Thank you, Darth Tyron. The something. I can't read that because my head's bowed. The Risen, which is going towards... What's RC? What's RC? And thank you, Little One. I'll put that towards Live Alive. Later. Alright, so, I'll type all that stuff up later. Okay, I've got a log. Kinda, yeah, Ross. Although not quite as that direction. But anyways, why would anyone work with him if he's a known snitch? Because he's a fixer. So, let's... Oh, no, you're doing the triple thing. It's just you don't have to do the triple thing, Mike Romano. So, let's explain what a fixer is. Now, hold on. Pause. Let's be boring for just a second and talk about real life. A real life fixer... He mentions he's a fixer for journalists. Now, journalists, this is a real thing. This is a real life thing. You hire a fixer whose entire job it is to be a professional correspondent. Now, what that means is a bit vague, so I'm going to try and give you an exact example. Let's say, random made-up example, you go to made-up land, because I don't want to narrow it. Okay, fine. You go to made-up-istan, we'll just call it that. And while you're there, there's a civil war going on. You're there to interview some of the people during this civil war. Cool. That sucks. Who do you talk to? How do you talk to them? How do you avoid saying the wrong things to the wrong people? How do you even talk to some of the local people? That's what the fixer's for. And again, this is a real thing. You can look this up. The fixer's job is to say, okay, you want to interview these people. All right. Don't talk to this person. Don't talk to this person. You can talk to this person and this person. Don't ask them about this or this. I actually got a quote here. Where was it? Hang on. I wrote it down. From Laurie Few, if you happen to recognize the name. He's a journalist. You don't have time not to listen to your fixer. Anybody who doesn't is going to step on a landmine, figurative or actual. And that's the truth of it. I know that there's this sort of thing where we're trying to think that the journalisms are... that journalists are people who are, not supposed to, non-combatants, not supposed to be attacked. But the reality is, life is a lot more complicated than that. And they need to have someone local who knows what the hell they're talking about. And I'm going to go and say this. Unfortunately, journalistic fixers have become a mainstay for the last 60 years, at least. It's still a thing today. There's still, Wenlock mentions travel programs. There is, even in a non-threatening situation, you still need someone local who speaks the language, knows the people, knows who to talk to, knows who to get what you want. And in a dangerous situation, you need to be careful, which means you need a local person who blah, 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 blah. Now, the reason I bring all of this up is Pittner actually flat out calls himself this type of a fixer. But he's a dude from Brooklyn who's currently staying in Kentucky. So you see the problem here. The funny thing here is that I wouldn't be surprised that he doesn't operate as the journalistic fixer. He operates as the fictional fixer. A fictional fixer is ironically nearly universal, because in a lot of fictional settings, it's the same job, even from something like Dungeons and Dragons to Cyberpunk, and I know those are both pen and paper. You get my point, though. Even though those two settings are wildly different in terms of tech and style and culture and everything, they still both have the fixer. Because in the most basic terms, a fixer tends to function as a quest giver. They're the coordinate. They're the contact. They're the person you go to find everything else. And that, styling back to the earlier comment from Lord Harrowmont, is why everybody still talks to Pittner. Because, yeah, he's a snitch, but he does know. He knows who to get into contact with, when and where and how and what. I mean, when Curtis comes in, he's got something for him off the top of his head. And that's a good fixer. And I want to mention something else here, which is funny, because I wrote this down in my notes, and then the episode proved me right. Because if you get a good fixer, you stick to that person because they are invaluable. It's like a good Ripper Doc over in Cyberpunk. That is an invaluable person. By the way, fixer's actually a class in Cyberpunk. They're actually called that. You stick to them. A good fixer who's loyal, who knows their stuff, and who gets you the right context and the right quests, that is an invaluable asset. You do not mess with that person. You don't turn on them. You don't betray them, because they are better than gold. This is especially true in Cyberpunk, because in Cyberpunk, who you know and how trustworthy and reliable they are generally is how good you're at. I'm saying this wrong. If you were to mathematically put how good you're doing, just like in life, how well off you are, it's not how many credits you've got or euros or anything like that. It's not what your level is, and it's not your gear. It's how many reliable and trustworthy contacts you have. And I'm not joking about that. That's a real thing. So you have a decent number of people that are relatable, trustworthy, professional. You got a good fixer. You got a good Ripper Doc. You've got a good solo you can call on if you need them. If you've got a good, I can't remember what they call it in Cyberpunk, but the hacker in Hybrid, you get the idea, right? Then you're doing great. If you don't, well, then you're making do. And yeah, exactly, Mr. Red. And Roman Cure is absolutely correct. Netrunner, thank you. Because a bad fixer will freaking get you killed. I'm not going to spoil Cyberpunk 2077, but we do encounter more than one bad fixers in that. We actually talked about this a lot during the Cyberpunk run. And this, of course, all perfectly fits Pittner. I swear I'm not just going off topic for no reason. This is Pittner. He's a good fixer. And it is emphasized throughout the whole episode. He knows his stuff. He is smart, on top of things, and he is, this is interesting, trustworthy. He's gigapudding. He is gigapudding. And do you understand how powerful gigapudding really is? Well, thank you, gigapudding. I will put that towards Victoria 3. Thank you. Writing it down later. All right, so, moving on. So, he's super invaluable. But I do want to mention two things before we move on. Trustworthy until he snitches. Well, it's funny you say that, because I've got a theory about that, but I'm gonna come back to that. I'm gonna circle back to that. Don't let me forget. Don't let me forget, because I'll probably forget. But I skipped over two scenes, so I want to talk about camera work for a second. And I know, Lore, you're boring and you're dumb, and I hate you, and it's okay. I understand completely. But in order to make it up to you, I've got this adorable shark. Okay, I hope this makes things clear between us while I talk about the extremely boring art of camera work. A lot of people are really underestimate the value of how you use the camera. This is going to sound like a strange comment, but one of the things I will always give George Lucas, yes, really, credit for is the fact that he knows how to use the camera. Of course he does. He was a film geek who worked on the tech side of things and grew up, all his early experience was in documentaries. That's all camera work, right? So of course he knows that. This is actually a new shark. It's a new Christmas present. It is not the only new shark. Anyways, I've got a third new shark too. So how you use the camera can do a lot. It can convey motion or tone or just a dozen other things. Even really basic things. Like, I'm going to use probably my favorite example of this, which is Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Hear me out for a second. So in DS9, there's a scene where Picard and Sisko confront each other. So most of you probably remember that scene. It's right at the beginning of Emissary. The way the camera is used is really well done in that scene. Because I'm not going to do a full play-by-play because it would probably take me like 10 minutes because that's how this works. But the camera starts off nice and close. Intimate is what that's called. You start on intimate, so the person is taking up the majority of the screen. And then as the conversation turns chilly, the camera backs off a bit. And then it does different things with angles. So kind of angled down or angled up depending on who is dominating the conversation at a given point in time. Because at one point it goes over into Sisko's court, and Sisko is now dominating the conversation. Sisko stays standing, Picard is sitting, and the camera accommodates that. And you get the idea, right? The camera is used to accent the scene in a way that most people will never, ever notice. And that's cool, because that's part of it, right? That's part of visual design. So, in general, the camera work in this show is excellent. They actually have a really good job of doing what I like to call the swivel move, which is this right here. It's a great way to make a panning shot look better. So I'm going to do that again in case you missed that. So let's say Raylan, you are now Raylan. Raylan here's the scene. Raylan's just walking down a thing and is going to go over and talk to a person, right? In the office. Real basic. So how do you make that work? It is your job as the camera director to make that look interesting. Now, the typical thing, the easy thing, is just a panning shot. The camera moves with him, and then that's it, right? Instead, what the camera actually starts to the left of Raylan, kind of pans around him as he's going, and then swoops a little bit, so now it's actually turning a little bit like this, and just that extra little bit of movement adds to the scene. It makes it look less boring, and it makes it look more dynamic. It makes it look, because the idea is to visually trick you, the audience, into feeling like you're there. And so that movement is kind of what someone could actually be seen doing if they were walking right behind Raylan. And there's all sorts of little tricks like that they pull, which is good stuff in general. However, you knew it was coming. There's one other trick, which I hate. And I'm just going to show you it right now. So pretend our little shark here, I haven't named them yet, don't even know their gender, is a camera, as I've been using them, right? This is the trick I hate. So, shaky cam. Now, shaky cam is... So let's talk about shaky cam really quick here. Now, first of all, most of you, when you are hearing the words shaky cam, you're probably thinking, there was no shaky cam in this episode. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the reason you're not thinking is sharky cam. Sharky cam. Oh, I hate Dutch angle. We've talked about Dutch angle. Dutch angle, no, is the answer to that. Don't do Dutch angle. Shaky cam, the reason it's done is to imply action and movement. You do it during action scenes, in order to try and make it so that it feels like the camera is a person. Remember, it's the same trick. It's trying to convince you, the audience, that you're there. And it makes you feel like you're running through there, and that's how that works, right? Now, as with all tools, I mentioned this earlier, it's how you use it that really matters. That's probably why you didn't even notice their shaky cam in this show, because they use it very sparingly. The problem is, as with almost... Oh, no, trust me, I hate the camera work in Discovery and Pearl Searcher. As with all tools, it's used as a shorthand, which is fine, except when it's overused as a shorthand. I'm sure most of you are thinking right now of at least one movie or show where they massively overuse the shaky cam. How many of you right now, off the top of your head, can think of at least one fight scene where you can't tell what's going on because of the usage and how they do the shaky cam? I can think of 3 right off the top of my head. I'll always go back to Bourne, because I saw that in the theaters and it literally made me nauseous. You can ask my friend Gary, he was there with me. But yeah, there's plenty of examples of this. They overuse it, they overdo it, and it's like, ugh, what the crap? That was, ironically, in my experience, there's another thing. I forgive me for going off topic here just a little bit. If you're sad about me going off topic, then you've never heard me talk about anything ever before. Oh, I know. I don't even want to get into shortcutting, Wenlock, or fast cutting, or what the hell it's called. Oh, it gave me a headache the entire time I was watching it act. I actually thought there was something wrong with my copy of it. Started looking into it, tried to find another copy of it, didn't, and I popped some pills and suffered. Not a fan. Anyways, so, forgive me for going off topic a little bit, but something that has just, I say recently, within about the last, about 10 years, has started finding its way back into cinema, is the still cam. In order to, and it's exactly what it sounds like. There's a couple of ways to do this, but the idea is to have the camera unnaturally still during a major action sequence. And the whole point of this is to kind of do the exact opposite of the point of the shaky cam, to make it feel like you, the audience, are observing like a play or like a spectacle, like you're watching a show, rather than that you're there. And obviously this is just an opinion and a preference, but I actually like that substantially more, not just because of the lack of headaching, but because it's so much more easy to see everything and then to appreciate all the work they're putting into the fight, into the action sequence, right? Yeah, that's how it works, Mike Tomato. So yeah, we're kind of swinging towards that. Well, I can't wait to see that be overused in the next 2 years. Everything Everywhere All at Once kind of uses this. To use a recent example, just came out last year. And of course, I can't think of another. John Wick tends to do this periodically, not always. So, and yeah, exactly. I'm with you, Jesse Ward. My brain it's so much easier for me to comprehend the image when I could just see the image. I'm off center. See the image, right? I can just actually see the whole thing. It's great. But forgive me for going off topic. So let's pull this back into the episode. So they only do a bit of shaky cam, and that's why I'm only mentioning this briefly. I think I've been talking for 5 minutes about this one topic briefly, because they don't overuse it, and I'm not going to ding the episode for it. But to use a specific example, there's actually several scenes in this episode which use shaky cam. But right towards the beginning, when they go after Tiny, right, and they've got a warrant for entry, and they go ahead and move in, and the camera's doing, and it's doing the shaky cam thing. Now you're probably thinking, hold on, Lore. Why would they do the shaky cam in that sequence? Well, there's all the things I talked about. But there's one last reason, and it's the funniest reason of all. You ready for this? It's cheaper. To do the shaky cam like they were doing, what they did was they had a person with the camera running backwards up the staircase and then pointing it at the direction they needed to point it at. So the shaky cam was quite literally natural. Whoever doing it wasn't doing this. They were just carrying the camera, and it was shaking by nature of the fact that they were jogging backwards up a staircase, right? They might not have been jogging backwards. There's ways to do it so that even though the camera's facing this way, you've got the viewfinder here so you can see what you're looking at. But you get my point. They were literally doing it, and so it does look more natural because it literally is. It's also a lot cheaper. There's something called Steadicam, which can help fix that sort of thing. And there's a bunch of other tech you can use to try and fix that sort of thing. You can put it on I forget what it's called. They've got this like pulley system or a crane, which will just kind of do this and you can program in the movement so it's really, really smooth. But that takes time and money. And of course, this is an outdoors shot, so it's cheaper to go ahead and do the shaky cam. Anyways, massive off-topic thing there. I don't know though. This is the reason the other final reason I brought this up. It's Shadow Machine. Shadow Machine is the reason they did the shaky cam. Shame on you, Shadow Machine. Shame on you. Croatia. Now, before I move forward, there is actually an image I got for this because I was curious how well this show was doing. I haven't found a lot of concrete data on the behind the scenes. I've complained about that before because I really dislike not having behind the scenes material for a show. But what you're looking at right now is the Nielsen rating for season 1 specifically, which is what we're covering, of Justified. Now, I'm going to spoil something. If I were to show you the Nielsen ratings for the entire series, the general trend is nothing but up. But anybody who's ever dealt with statistics can tell this chart is good. This chart shows a lot of information, but I'm going to break it down for you really quick. Because I have a feeling that their budget went up after season 1. That's the last reason I'm bringing this up here. So first episode had a little over an 8.25. That's really good. Immediate plummet for the second episode. The least rating we had is the episode we just covered. That's episode 3 down there at 7.5. Cool. Then we jump up a little bit for the next one, jump down, and the slow raising, then there's a peak, there's another trough, and then finally, all the way over at episode 12, interest finally recovers to the same level it was at for the first episode, and the finale is spikes. People are really into whatever the finale is. Now, I don't know any of these episodes. I don't know what's going on for anybody who's seen this show. Maybe this makes more sense to you in context. But this is what we call a typical upward trending viewing rating. Now, let me explain that a little bit. Let's say I put out a feature. Let's call it World of Warcraft. Let's say it's really popular, which it isn't. Let's say lots of people watch it, which they don't. Now, what you're going to see is if you put a chart like this for something really popular like that, you're going to see something very, very similar. It's going to start high, and then it's going to plummet almost immediately. I know that sounds strange, but just based on decades of experience and statistics and data, the first episode and the last episode are always going to be your highest points. The only exceptions are exactly that, exceptions. So even in a popular show which is doing well, these are going to be your outliers, beginning and end. The trend going through is more interesting. You'll notice it is an upward trend. That's what that line means. So a drop-off immediately? Of course there's a drop-off immediately. Most people didn't stick with it. I say most. That's the wrong word. But about 1 million viewers, according to this, did not stick with the show. That makes sense. Way more people are willing to try something than stick with something. But that's why I say this is a good chart. Only losing 1 million viewers, that's really good. And the fact that it then picked up again means word of mouth started happening. Because that's what that little... that first dip and the second, sorry, not dip, the opposite of a dip, the first peak and the second peak, that's what that means. That's word of mouth working. That's standing around the water cooler at work talking about, did you see the latest episode of Justified? I myself have literally interacted with this because every person I told in real life that I was covering Justified, from PAX to my brother-in-law, all say, oh man, no, that show's great. I can't wait to hear your opinion on it. That's how that works. And again, this is the kind of curve you'll see in very popular shows. TNG has a very similar arc to this, unlike DS9, whose arc goes universally down because of complications. I don't want to get into that. It's not like DS9 got worse. It's just DS9 did not have popular appeal like TNG did. That's all that really means. So. Yeah, no, this is a great trend, and this is a great showing, and I imagine that they were rather happy with those figures, especially since the lowest showing they had was 7.5 on this episode. Anyways, hi, my name is the Lore Runner. I talk about how television functions. Lowest rating ever for an episode of Trek? Probably something in TOS. I should also mention that TOS ratings are actually wrong. No, I'm dead serious. Since you brought it up, I'm going to talk about it now. So Nielsen existed back then in a different format, but they were still keeping track of viewing figures. And just like Nielsen ratings, it's extremely inaccurate, but whatever. The point here being that they were keeping track of those numbers wrong. And they thought TOS was like down about here. And it was actually closer to up here, like triple what they thought it was. I mentioned this actually in either the TAS or the TOS ruminations, I forget which, because when they canceled TOS, they found out that they were wrong about its viewing figures and were like, oh crap, we just canceled a popular show. And it's one of the contributing figures for why the animated series had the executive support to get started at all. Anyways, so let's get back to Justified for just a second. So moving on. We talked about the cameras, we talked about what a fixer is, and we talked about criminal categorization. So you'll notice I'm talking almost nothing about the episode itself. There's not that much to cover on the episode proper. I don't want to say it's painted by numbers, but it's probably the most average episode I've seen so far. Not really an insult. There's still some good stuff here, obviously, but there's a reason there's not much to talk about in the episode proper. There's a little couple of nice tidbits. There's a background element between Raylan and Ava. Raylan talks about him and his ex met somewhere else. And as they're talking about it, there's this little tidbit. It's all obvious stuff. There's tension between Ava and Raylan. I'll mention that later. There's also a little bit of backstory we get for Raylan. But the thing that stuck with me the most is Raylan mentions that his ex, whose name I don't even remember, don't even say it, I'm not going to remember it, is someone who also vowed never to come back to Kentucky. Which, if you're paying any kind of attention, she is currently back in Kentucky. So there's just this little unprompted question sitting there. Why is she back? We know why he's back. We had a whole plot story about why he's back, but why is she back? Moving on. So, this then leads to Curtis, who got a little bit of information from Pittner, from his fixer, about a job. So Curtis, who's a leg breaker, goes after Travis. This is not a great scene. I don't mean to sound unkind here, but the actor who plays Curtis is not doing the job that... He's doing the job he's directed to, but you can almost feel that he doesn't really want to. And the actor who plays Travis clearly doesn't have a handle on what kind of role he's supposed to be playing. So both characters are actually kind of inconsistent in their portrayal, and I feel like they just didn't have a strong identity for them. Because both of them feel like they fit into a particular, category, one of the archetypes of criminals, but then they shift, and then they shift, and then they shift. They try to throw this away. There's this bit where Travis says, I'm whoever I need to be, but I don't buy that for a second. I really think that, and Curtis's actor is fine, it's just, I really think that there's some directing issues going on. That's how the vibe came to me. Because they confront each other, and Travis plays like he's totally on top of the situation, but he's actually not. And Curtis plays like he's totally on top of the situation, but he's actually not. And Travis is supposed to be this great con man, but he's not. And Curtis is supposed to be this great intimidator, but he's not. So I just didn't buy the whole scene. I will say that the only interesting thing about that scene is when Curtis finally thinks he actually has the upper hand on Travis, that's the first time he listens to him. No, I agree with you, Jesse Ward. I think that both of these are literal one-off characters, and I will admit, as a writer especially, one of the hardest things to do is have a unique personality for someone who doesn't have a lot of screen time. I talk about processing or chewing. One of the ways, the best way to flesh out a character is to give them more screen time. And I don't just mean literally, because then the actor and the director can work with them. As a writer, just text on a page, the more you write for a character, the more you get into their headspace, right? A lot of writers will tell you this. I'll tell you this, because I was just doing this over the last few days while I was finalizing the Diablo rewrite script, which is done. We're taking auditions. Go audition. The more time you spend with the character, the more you, the writer, know that character. And I feel like whoever was writing this episode just didn't spend enough time on these two and just never really got who they were. And so then the actors and the directors get the page and they're like, well, okay. And so they just kind of portray it per scene rather than per character. Moving on. So Pittner isn't there. Cool. And then Raylan goes to see Pittner with his reward money, and he encounters Travis. Okay. Now, Travis is interesting because he is a terrible liar. First thing, hey, what's your name? Gives him his real name. The dude actually assumes that that's a pseudonym, because his real name sounds like a pseudonym, and asks for his driver's license. Of course, he can't say no to that. Notice the hesitation, though. But yeah, okay, sure, here's my thing. And yeah, and where is he? He's gone. He's gone for about a week. He's been gone for about a week. This is kind of my point. So I'm a terrible liar. I've talked about this before, but one of the biggest traits for being a good liar is being able to lie smoothly without prep time. Most people, even me, could tell a lie if I had a long time to really process it and get it in my head and get it straight and practice the script, essentially, right? Improving on the fly, that's much harder. And you'll notice Travis is terrible at it. Like, yeah, this. Oh, this. I'm his friend. Yeah. Don't know when he's going to be back. Just watching his place for him for an undetermined amount of time and have been doing so for a week. And anybody who knows Pittner at all would know that he's a regular someplace and would know that's a lie. And this is just awful. Yeah, he tries to make up a whole story on the spot, and he's awful at it. So Raylan's like, okay. And normally I'd be like, so once again, we're showing low-tier incompetent villains for our hero to go after. I've talked about that before. In this show, you start off low and you raise the competency level of the antagonists and the obstacles as time goes on. That makes sense, right? Problem. Raylan is also kind of incompetent here. There's several times where he just acts like he's got a hunch. And this should have been much more... Yeah, no, this is sus. And he probably should have had backup. Like when he went to talk to Tim in the middle when he was trying to identify who Curtis was, and he ends up taking the bulletproof vest, which was good, he probably should have taken Tim with him. I was actually weirded out. Yeah, exactly, Jesse Ward. Raylan was just right, even though he had all the pieces on the page to figure this out. I sound like I'm coming down on the episode, and I kind of am. Because this would have been a decent time. Like, lean into it, right? Make Travis and Curtis both bad liars. Either in their body language, their dialect, or both. And then have Raylan pick up on that, start doing his backup, have a backup team ready to go, and then go in with force. You remember just last episode? I don't remember the dude who was the villain, but there's this bit where he goes in to talk to the guy. You remember that? He's leaning around, hey, can I get 10 seconds to talk to you? And then he talks, hey, there's a sniper. And they say, I don't see no sniper. And his response is, do you think I'd be in this house if I didn't have backup? Now, I applauded that when we were talking about that episode, because that's absolutely right. That is so correct. That is competence on display there. They were going into a hostage situation, a kidnapping situation, with someone who had a gun. That is absolutely correct. And here he's just like, I'm going to go check this out. I'm curious. He even gets shot for it, although we'll cover that in a minute. So, moving on. Yeah, exactly. Raylan could have just been like, oh, yeah, no, what about such and such? Oh, yeah, such and such. Okay, cool. And just, whatever. I'm going to move on. Because Curtis and Travis have a really weird dynamic. I wish they'd had more time to flesh them out. But I'm going to come back to them in a second, because I don't have much to say about them. There is a really good scene. It's actually my favorite scene of the whole episode. So they go and like, okay, we need to figure out where Pittner's money is. Okay, so they take off. He's got the headphones on. They've been pouring music into his ears, so he can't hear them. He's been gagged. He's been blindfolded. They're like, all right, tell us where it is. And they try to pull a bail. Pittner sees through them instantly. Like that. I love everything about this scene. It's probably one of the best written scenes in the work. And it also goes back to that tiering thing. Pittner, despite being portrayed as just some schmuck who's a thing, he's a good fixer. He's actually higher tier than these two yahoos. So he susses them out immediately. And then it gets even better or worse, depending on how you think about it. Because it's like, oh, I'm gonna snap off her finger, and he says, "Go ahead, have fun, Curtis." And she says, "I thought you cared about me." And his response, "You thought right." Oh, oh God, that burn. and she reacts appropriately. She's just like, all the shaking, all the play, you know, oh God, they're gonna kill me. Oh my God. How did you know? I just oh my God. And it's actually this wonderful, horrible moment. You sleeping with him? Never mind. I don't want to know. And it's just, oh, that hurts. That hurts. So we see the dynamic now gets tossed a little bit, and they really could have run with this. We have Samantha, who is not a criminal at all. She just wants money. I shouldn't say that. Samantha's, there's a term, it's an orbit criminal. That's what it's called. This is a real term. I might be using it wrong, but it's someone who orbits crime, but doesn't really have the mindset for crime. So to get into psychology very briefly, believe it or not, most people do not have the mindset for being a criminal. Even people who actively undertake criminal acts, of those, only a relatively small portion of them have the mindset for being a criminal. You know, and I'm not going to get into the polemic territory of people being forced into crime because of desperation or fear or drug addiction or whatever. You get the idea. There's been studies for decades at this point that show that most people just don't have it in them to do something like slug someone over the head, possibly causing them fatal damage and taking their wallet. It's just not there. And so she's one of those people. She likes the idea of crime, the benefit of crime, I mean, all that money, but she doesn't actually want to do any of this stuff. You'll notice that the original plan was grab Pittner, threaten him, get money, leave. Cool. And she was okay with that. Then they go to plan B, which doesn't work anymore at all. Plan C, which doesn't works even less. And now they're like, and there's this big moment for basically everyone. Because nobody's actually 100% sure what to do going forwards. And of course, Samantha is totally not on board with actually causing any damage or harm to Pittner because she's out here. This then leads to Curtis and Travis. Now, Curtis and Travis are obviously more willing to do that. But what's really funny is Curtis makes a mistake, which I'll talk about in a second. And Travis, he has that mentality. He is a criminal. And I'm going to probably use that terminology going forward in that series because you now know what I mean when I say that. Not someone who has accomplished a criminal act. Someone who is a criminal. Someone who is willing to snap off someone's ear or his dick, as he actually threatens later on. Travis, so yeah, a lawbreaker versus a criminal. I like that. A lot of people break laws. Not a lot of people are criminals. So, and that's true in real life. So then Curtis goes out to confront Raylan, and Curtis is all psyched about it because Curtis is a leg breaker. He's used to being the shark in any given scenario. He's used to being up here like, yeah, I got this. I'm on top of things. Raylan outplays him psychologically perfectly. This is our first duel of this particular episode. You notice this duel does not end with a gunshot. Because not every duel has to. Remember, and I talked about this already, most of dueling is actually up here. So Raylan, Curtis is like getting ready and starts kind of getting his stance going and getting his arm going. And then Raylan draws on him. Curtis freezes, like, because he knows he's had. He knows that's it. And then Raylan drops his mag. But he might have one in the chamber. You willing to bet on that? And then Curtis is just... he puts it back, reholsters it. So anyways, I'm going to go get some money. Raylan won that draw. But what I love about it is I agree with Jesse Ward completely. I think Curtis had this whole idealized thing of the romanticization of the draw as portrayed in fiction. And Raylan just so thoroughly outplaying him on that just kind of made it a little bit more real there. But what's really funny is Curtis's whole language here is fantastic. He's all getting into it, and he freezes, like, holy crap. But then, no, it's okay. He's coming back with the money. And, okay, cool. Then Raylan goes and gets the real money. I hate to complain about the script again. This whole sequence needs a polishing pass. Raylan should have gone and gotten some of the money. Or maybe there's a thing. Because there's this thing where real cops do this. They'll get a sheath of fake bills, and they'll put a real 100 on top, a real 100 on bottom. And at a glance, it looks like a big old stack of money. It's actually just $200, right? This is a real thing. Obviously, there's more complicated versions of this. Sometimes they use printouts for the middle ones, so at a glance, you can still see the green there. But you get the idea. It's only $200. But no, he actually gets the 20 grand. Also, Curtis actually thinks, despite telling the worst lie in the known universe, even worse of a one than Trevor, yeah, I'll hold on to that 10 grand for you. I'll hold on to that 10 grand for him. And then Raylan's like, yeah, sure, I'll go get that. Why does Curtis think that he would go for that? Why does Raylan agree to go get... None of this makes sense, and the more you think about it, the more it falls apart. I'm with Jesse Ward on this. It feels like everyone's just kind of bumbling their way through trying to get to the next big scene. And yeah, Curtis and Travis are constantly lying about the various amounts of money throughout the course of the work. And neither of them convince the other at any given point in time. It's just ridiculous. Yeah, exactly, Mr. Red. Yeah, I'm going to go take $20,000 of federal money, which, if you're not aware of how that works, if you, as a federal employee, misplaced 20 grand, that's on you. Because that is the federal government's money. He is a marshal. That is a multi-state organization. That is a crosses boundaries organization. What are you doing, Raylan? I do like that he's got the money. Like, he comes back, and he's got the envelope open, and the money's showing in there. But again, he could have done that with the fake bill idea I mentioned earlier. But and you don't even need to spend a lot of exposition on this. This show has already shown it's more than willing to get across the necessary information quickly, efficiently, and visually. Imagine he goes back and is like, hey, I need a fake 20 grand. All right, I need a paper 20 grand. Yeah, sure. And as he's talking with Tim, you remember he then goes and talks to Tim immediately after, they just show a shot of someone printing out the bills and chopping them up to rubber band together. That's all you need to do. That's all that's necessary. One quick additional shot to showcase this is not real money. Raylan's not an idiot. Cool. But moving on. So then Raylan grabs a vest, probably one of the smarter things he does. And then Curtis proves the theme of the episode. Now, in my experience, and I've fallen into this too, sometimes an author really, really wants to have a theme and isn't 100% sure how to make that come across on the screen. In this case, the theme is professional trust. And I specifically say professional trust, because when people think about trust, what they're usually thinking about is something a little bit different than professional trust. What is professional trust? It's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It is when you trust someone else to do their freaking job. They are now a partner, an ally, and a comrade in the task or project you're going forward through, right? Like a fixer, for example. So Curtis makes this... Yeah, exactly, Jesse Ward. Curtis makes a huge mistake. He treats Travis like a partner, like a fellow ally in a criminal endeavor. Now, I could forgive this, but this is weird how much Curtis drops the ball here. There's even this bit where Travis actually insists maybe we should empty the gun, and Curtis says, no, you gotta feel the weight of it. So Curtis, deliberately, knowingly, and intentionally, pushes a loaded gun into the hand of someone he has actually already threatened to chop the ear off of. In an endeavor in which he's already trying to scam the other guy, too. Now, we never know. how much Curtis is willing to kill. Obviously, there's a degree of that there because he was wanting to duel, but that's romanticization. That's that idealization thing. I'm not sure how much of a killer he is, but we see exactly how much of a killer Travis is. And I believe that because Travis, I said this earlier, so Travis shoots him. Okay, that sucks. This is, of course, the other reason, I hate to reiterate this one last time, this is why a good fixer that you can trust professionally is such a damned invaluable thing. That's something you could take to the bank, to quote Jesse Ward there. Yeah, also, as an aside, sorry, Lord Harriman points out something I should also mention. Curtis was unwilling to torture Pittner, and even explains why. He's been good to me. I can't do that to him. It wouldn't feel right. Nice distinction there. And yeah, I was actually going to mention some other thing. There's this other little thing here. Yeah, Travis lets him position so he'll fall into the water. Travis is such an incompetent boob, but is also a killer, and that is a dangerous thing. So, never give a loaded weapon to anyone unless you already know where they're going to point it. That's true. That was in Babylon 5. It's also very true. There's a little bit of visual storytelling. Curtis is not exactly a great guy, but he is, once again, a better criminal than Travis. Not because of the Pittner thing, but also because he draws and doesn't shoot Travis. Why would he, after all? They're partners. It is Travis who shoots him, despite everything. It's also worth noting that Travis completely loses that draw because Travis is also not that good at the actual act of being a criminal. He's just willing. So then the duel officially... Well, actually, no. What happens... Sorry, I skipped a step. Travis then tries to intimidate Samantha in a scene that honestly doesn't really feel like it fits in the story, but whatever. Mostly because Travis just has been really weirdly portrayed up until now. If they built up Travis to this scene would have been great, but instead it's just like, whoa, left field. He's like, oh, I'm gonna torture him. I'm gonna torture him. I'm gonna torture him. Yeah, I'm gonna torture him. Oh, hang on, that's the door. Then he walks off. Naturally, Samantha, and I did like this, immediately goes to Pittner and it's like, oh God, I'm sorry. And he's like, it's okay. Get me out of this thing. Good job. Yeah, good job. You've been doing well. It's just, what? Quick aside, I mentioned this earlier. Yeah, exactly, Jesse Ward. I mentioned this earlier because this is why I think Travis should have been consistently portrayed as horrible. Pittner at the beginning of the episode, like the third scene, has a whole speech about the guys with machetes, right? He's talking about, God, everyone just they take him around and they chop him into bits. And they throw him around. And Pittner makes it clear he hates that. Because, again, Pittner is not that classic criminal. So he's just, oh, God, no. And then there's these guys. And I decided to go down to Miami, but then there's these guys, and there's all sorts of guys I know, and their only thing they have in common is they all like to chop people up with machetes. And it's clear he is super nope with any of that. The reason I bring this up is because the emphasis here is that Travis is one of those guys with the machete. You know, one of the guys who likes chopping up people with machetes. And that, again, if they had consistently portrayed Travis, that setup, build-up, and payoff would have been great. And instead, it's not. And again, I don't know if that's script, director, actor, or any combination thereof. But moving on. So then the duel officially starts, the big duel. Raylan shows up. He's got the envelope open. I already mentioned that. Ticking clock is building tension. Samantha's quickly trying to get, oh God, I need to get you out of here. Raylan immediately calls for backup. Would have been nice if he had backup already there. I've already complained about that. Pittner arrives, shoots Raylan. Now, I was going to complain about this. But actually, upon second and third thought, I like this for one very, very simple reason. Pittner's not a killer. He was shooting in what's referred to as self-defense. We've actually already talked about that rather at length. But the idea here is, remember how I mentioned that certain people don't have the mindset of a criminal? if someone's coming at you with a knife or a gun, you are in, threatening circumstance, and you shoot them, you're not a killer mentally. You don't have the mind of a criminal mentally, right? This is an important distinction. And this matters in real life, obviously, but also this very much matters in fiction. Yeah, exactly, just what everybody knows. Everybody has that fight or flight mechanism to some extent or another. Pittner is very, like he's fumbling. He doesn't even know how to shoot. In fact, his shot is terrible. The only reason he hit is because he went for center of mass, which I'm not going to get into that discussion. And, it knocks him down. Oh, God. And then, Raylan looks up, sees the guy through the door, shoots him, down he goes. But it's a good scene to help establish Pittner, because obviously is it not only clear that he's not a killer, but he's like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, I just shot a cop. Like, he's freaking out over it. Not in the I'm in trouble way, in the oh God, what have I done way. And credit to the actor for that distinction, because it all comes out in his performance. He clearly sounds freaked out over shooting the wrong person. As he should. He's not a killer. So, good scene. I'll give you that. I'll give you that episode. Very good scene. I also like how the episode correctly remembers that having a bulletproof vest means that getting shot hurts like hell. In fact, if you're paying attention, he's going to go in for x-ray and get a mandatory week off. That's absolutely correct. I don't want to go too much into this, but getting shot with a bulletproof vest hurts like hell. It can actually still be fatal. It's just, it's not automatically fatal, right? Hell, I mean, not, obviously you can survive being shot, but you get my point. It's a different thing. Yeah, let's not even get into the birds. He even mentions there might be, I forget how he phrased it. He gives a medical term, but there might be a bit of impaling or something like that. Because it can still actually get in, Just a nice little bit of reality I appreciate there. So then there's this interesting bit where he talks to Pittner, who is obviously not going to sell out Samantha. And since he's the only real witness on the matter, it's kind of thing. I think it was Pierce. He gives a line. If buying my life back is worth selling my dream, is it really worth buying? I don't like this. Because here's the problem. The whole episode, Pittner, in the foreground of the plot, has been just desperately trying to get out of Kentucky because of how much he hates this place. And in the background, Raylan has desperately been trying to get out of Kentucky because of how much he hates this place. And this is a little bit of shortcut writing. It feels like the writer wanted to get to point B and wasn't sure how to get there. So yeah, so that there's that line which doesn't land, which isn't in character for him, and only exists to prompt Raylan to then go to Ava and be like, oh, I've totally found something worth staying, smoochy smooch. And I don't buy any of it. And I'm going to piece through a little bit. So first of all, let's rewind a second. So he gives that big line, and yeah, I'm with Jesse Ward. It smacks of trying to sound deep, but it just comes across nonsensical. It's easier to do than you'd think. Lo, the dawn shall come. This is a guy who is competent and smart, who is able to figure out things just based on information and nothing else. This is a guy who probably should have said something along the lines of, if I had told them where the money was, they would have just shot me. And that's it, like just end sentence. That's all he needs to say. He could have also said, you don't give an inch to a thug like that, because then they're just going to take more. Both of these statements are true, and Pittner would be completely right in making both of them. Instead, he gives this weird, nonsensical, pseudo-philosophical bullcrap, which is arguably out of character for him. And it's like, okay. And then the scene meanders, like they were trying to fill time, and there's no payoff to the scene. It's probably the only scene in the entire work I will actually flat out say is badly written. Like, he's like, oh, these hicks and these bumps, and oh, they suck, and you know who said you're here for you in the first place? Get your money out. It should have been a banter scene, but it isn't. It could have been a character scene, but it isn't. It could have been a background plot scene, but it isn't. Instead, it's just a waste of time scene. Stuff like this is why this episode kind of dips down for me in overall quality, because it's just like, what? I did notice that, Crimson King. He doesn't snitch on Samantha, which of course makes sense. After all, he's a good fixer. You never sell out your loyal contacts. And I know what you're thinking. She turned on him. No, Curtis turned on him. Although even Curtis didn't really turn on him, now that I'm thinking about it. Curtis was willing to take his money, but not willing to torture him or kill him. You get my point. And then we switch to Raylan. So that's the first thing I had a problem with. Then Raylan goes and meets Ava, who is, of course, in what can barely be called clothing. I know. It was in the middle of the night, but I mean, holy crap. And she comes down and he's like, maybe if I found something worth staying, smoochy smooch. I know you're all going to jump on me because y'all think I'm anti-romance and you're wrong. But what? This comes out of nowhere. And that's my biggest problem with it. I know this is going to sound strange, but this isn't built up at all. Oh, don't mistake me. Ava wanted to jump his bones the moment she saw him. In fact, if you remember, the very first scene she's in, where she sees him, she rushes up and kisses him, and then mentions she had a crush on him since she was 12. So, her crushing all over him makes way too much sense. Especially given the total contrast between him and her ex-husband. But him? He has shown no interest in her. He is his presentation, his portrayal, his acting, and the fact that there's still an investigation going, which they're both a part of. Like, there's all sorts of legal reasons this shouldn't happen, but even if I was willing to ignore all of that, there's nothing. And Darch Monster hits the nail on the head. So something I've gotten some flack for over the years is that I want romance in fiction, but a lot of people say, hang on, Lore, there's something other than romance, and that's lust. Now, okay, that's valid. Let's be honest about that. There is such a thing as, you're hot, let's have a fling. My biggest issue with that is that fiction doesn't know how to do that. I can think of one episode of all of Star Trek that actually does that right. Points if you can name it, because I've already covered that episode from now's perspective. So I'm okay with lust, but the problem here is what we already talked about and what Darch Monster just brought up. There's no lust here. He hasn't been just like, I'm just biting his lip like, ugh, or really wanting that, or just, God, man, that'd be nice, but no. Instead, it's just been nothing. It's been nothing the whole time. And yeah, no, and you're right, Jesse Ward. The problem here is that it's clear that she is written to be the love interest. She is, in almost every way, a fling of the week, a romance of the week. And that doesn't work here. Now, we'll see where this goes, but within the confines of this episode, this is just, yeah, okay, chkunk. And that's one of the biggest things I complain about romance in modern fiction. Is two people hook up. I shouldn't say modern. That's not true. This has been happening since the 60s. Something I complain about in fiction is that two people hook up because it's a check mark. It's a box that needs to be ticked. The audience wants romance. So you hook them up. There you go. And again, this has been a problem for decades. And that's my biggest issue with it in this episode. Hey, let's hook up. Why? By the way, none of you got it. Although, actually, I kind of agree with Lord Harriman. So let's go ahead and go with two decent lust hookups. But no, the one I was thinking about is actually in Enterprise. In the episode 2 Days and 2 Nights, I think is the name of the episode. It's when they go to Ryza. And Hoshi has a random hookup with some alien who happens to be a linguist. Who happens to know about language. And it's actually portrayed really well. It's weird, because that if you're thinking of that episode, you're probably thinking that episode sucked. That episode did suck, but weirdly enough, Hoshi's random hookup was treated surprisingly well and surprisingly maturely. It was exactly what a lust hookup should be. It's so rare to see that. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. So all of this, And the worst part, if I might be so bold, is that they end the episode on this. In fact, I didn't think they ended the episode on this at first, because I'm like, well, that doesn't work. That doesn't process. And then the camera, if you pay attention, goes behind a bunch of sharks who are going to play the role of the bush, right? And so the camera goes behind the bush here, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, someone's watching them, and it's going to be like a hint of something to come. No, that was just an artistic choice. It's the end of the episode. Now, if you have done a decent amount of build-up, a payoff like that, terminating an episode, works. Because that's the conclusory point, right? That's just the moment, right? You did it. You scored the goal. You made the point. You succeeded. Mission accomplished. They're together. Awesome. But there's been no build-up. Even ignoring the fact that we're only 3 episodes in, as I've already elucidated, there has been no build-up. So that doesn't work. And then the only other way this works is if this is kind of a weird to-be-continued kind of a thing for some random hookup, which is how it's being portrayed. Random hookups don't get to-be-continueds. That's how they work. They're random and they're hookups. Yeah, exactly, Jesse Ward. So I'm sorry to keep banging on about this point, but my point is this episode was decent with a couple of stumbles until the outro. And the outro just fumbles hard. Like, what are you doing? Why? Okay. I'm going to let it go because we're done. Because now we got to rate this. So let me go ahead and pull up the sheet here. I am always harder on outros and intros. That has always been true. So, obviously, let's talk about this because this hasn't come up yet. But this is something that's true with my little color system, right? Those colors, purple down to black, that's for all of television. Just like my game reviews, right? I'm not reviewing how good of a Mega Man game this is. I'm reviewing how good of a game this is. I bring that up because obviously that changes this kind of dynamic substantially. So something like if we're just to look at the 3 episodes we've covered, this would be way down at blue because for the standard of Justified, it's terrible, right? But we're looking at all the television. We're looking at every show I've ever covered. At this point, I've covered a lot. I know a lot of it's Star Trek, but that's 2 years of work underneath my belt. So, all things considered, I could see this as a green, but I think I'm going to vote for this one being a yellow, average. I think that this episode, while not good for Justified, is still pretty good for television, average. And the way this goes is Lamentation is at the bottom, that's black. And then we go up, and then there's Awful, which is blue, below average, which is green, average, which is yellow. It's all labeled on the spreadsheet. Above average, which is orange, good, which is red, and great, which is purple. And yeah, ironically, you're probably thinking, why is black the bottom? Black licorice. That's the logic there. Anyways, and then you're probably thinking, why do you go blue, green, yellow, orange, red, purple? Because it makes sense to me. So that's the answer. I'm just going to be honest about it. That's the answer. And of course, it's odds. That way there can be a middle. But anyways, I would say... Actually, that would be this finger, wouldn't it? Whatever. Point being, I feel like I'm in agreement with several people in chat. I feel like this feels yellow. And that is correct, Mike Tomato. I'm not Sci-Fi Debris. I'm actually a professional reviewer. Sorry. I actually like Sci-Fi Debris. I have a lot of respect for him. I had a bit of a unknown rivalry for a while there with him because people kept comparing me to him when I started doing Voyager. And then I covered all of Star Trek, so I think we know who won that contest. Anyways, so, yeah, I feel like this is an average episode. Whoops. And we're going to go ahead and label it as such. There we go. Yeah, no, I think that tracks. Next week, I have no idea. There will, of course, be a thing next week. But before I cut off, A lot of people wondering when the LGA is. So I still have prep work for the LGA. I was going to do it yesterday, but I wanted to do it properly. I'm not going to show you it here. I don't want to tease. Oh yeah, what were you reminding me of, Lord Harriman? I'm going to keep talking while Lord Harriman types. Next Friday will be the LGA. I'll put a notification on the website. I'll mention it in Discord. But I was going to do it yesterday, but I wanted to have some presentation values. I wanted to prove that I'm better than the Video Game Awards. And then I realized that I already succeeded at that by virtue of not being the Video Game Awards. Cool. However, having accomplished that, now I can go ahead and firmly say that I still want to do a better job of it. And I've got some ideas for how to present it and stuff like that. So we're going to be doing that next Friday at 10 a.m. EST as per usual. Now you're probably wondering, I'll go ahead and chop off the local recording here.